Mini cuts are here to save the day. We're going to find out today whether mini cuts are the key to long all seasons or not. And if we're going to use them, how do we go about using them? So that we can make sure that we maximize the rate of gain. And this will allow us to make sure that we are maximizing the amount of the tissue we add season to season and still leaving ourselves in a spot to be able to get in contest shape when it's time to prep. So what is the goal of a mini cut and what is typically the problem with them? So the goal is going to be to get to a lower body fat set point that is going to allow us to set up the next push phase or potentially a contest prep in a phase upcoming. And there's a lot of benefits to mini cuts that really make them extremely valuable, especially when you get athletes that are coming to you a little bit too far gone from a body fat perspective, and it really allows them to set up the following time period to be extremely productive. So some of the biggest things you're going to see from an improvement standpoint is obviously improved body composition. We're going to see body fat get lowered. We're going to see health metrics start to get improved. We're going to potentially see training performance increase, especially when people are slacking on their cardiovascular activity. The mini cut kicks them back in the gear and they gain some of those cardiovascular adaptations. And the big one is going to be the response to food, which is the whole reason we're doing this mini cut in the first place. And this is really going to allow the athlete to start to get the most out of their phase that's upcoming. Digestion will be improved. Typically, psychologically, the athlete will feel better because they just don't feel like a fat blob all of the time. And it really allows them to get to a place where they are able to make the most of that next phase. So typically, my suggestion would be is to not be too far from. So typically my suggestion would be to not be further than a 6-week mini cut away from 24 weeks out. That would technically put you at 30 weeks. If you watch one of the other videos, I do say to try to keep people at around 28 weeks out for the max all season. But if you know that you're going to be going into another all season phase, it's okay if some of these athletes slip a little bit further than that because you can just do the mini cut to get them back to the correct set point, and then they're good to go for that next phase. Are they valuable? If so, where do these mini cuts fit in timelines? There's two places that I really think that they fit the best. And the first one is my preferred way to run a mini cut. I just think the outcomes are always the best for multiple reasons, but that's going to be off of the back end of a baseline phase into a push up. And the reason I like this is because you start the mini cut with baseline compounds in play. Your food is high, your body fat is high. So you're doing most of the shelving off of that initial fat that's easy to get off when compounds are low and the likelihood for you to lose tissue is pretty low because the body fat's at the highest set point. Then as you start that push phase up and the compounds start to escalate up, you kind of let that mini cut bleed into that push through the first 3 or 4 weeks, and the compounds are getting escalated while the mini cut is getting to the hardest point so that the compounds are helping you with the tissue retention side of it. And it really sets you up to just be ready to rock into a surplus when that mini cut is over. Now, you could potentially do this on the back end of a push phase. Let's say your all season moves a bit too quick. You get to a body fat set point too high, maybe 15, 16 weeks in, and you were planning on running 20 to 24 weeks of all season. Then potentially you could run a mini cut off the back end of that all-season phase into the early beginnings of the baseline phase. When you drop the compounds at the end of a push, the esters are going to probably have to clear for a while, assuming that you're using long esters and assuming that the compound load got decently high. Then what that's going to do is it's going to serve as tissue retention as those start to clear. And that back end of that mini cut is going to be covered, where by the time you've cleared most of the esters, you're probably pulling out of the mini cut from there. So those will be the two ones. Obviously, the one on the back end of the all-season phase is more off the back end of making a mistake, and preferably we're doing it leading into a push, which is going to be the more ideal phase. But there are two places I see this done that I do think this is not where it should go at all. The first one is going to be during the post-show phase. You finish your prep, you binge or you overeat for 3 or 4 weeks. You realize that you're a fat slob and you think dieting is going to be the problem. And you think dieting is going to be the solution. You are not in a state to run a mini cut and continue to diet immediately post-show. And so this is primary mistake number one when it comes to mini cuts, and this is the biggest thing to stay away from. If you do overeat, Just accept that, eat at maintenance for a few weeks until you're fully recovered from prep, and then start your all season from there. And that's where you're going to see better outcomes rather than trying to diet again just after binging for 3 or 4 weeks and potentially making that binging problem worse. The second one is going to be during the smack dab middle of a push phase. And this is often the client that takes the cheat meals off plan way too frequently and way too large of boluses. They get fat extremely quickly. They're only 8 to 12 weeks into their all season and they're already needing to mini cut. This is such an unproductive time to mini cut because everything in the middle of a push phase should be clicking for you. Compounds should be starting to reach the highest serum level. We should be seeing training progressions across the board, and this really should be the most productive time of all season. And so if you're having to do these mini cuts middle of push phases, a lot of times you'll also see that it's because you started the push phase too fat, and you probably should have done the mini cut leading into that push phase rather than throughout the middle of that push. So when it comes to mini cuts, they're absolutely valuable. The time that we do them is really important, and so we need to understand that. And the biggest thing is getting in and getting out. Duration for these mini cuts should only be 6 to 10 weeks. We don't want to be taking these athletes into diet adaptations, which would require thyroid medication being brought in or anything along those lines. We want to get in and get out, so that rate of loss is going to be pretty quick, anywhere from 1 to 1.5%, especially on the beginning portion of that mini cut phase, so that you can get the fat off, set up the next phase, and move forward, and use that mini cut how it was intended to maximize your off-season progress.